Good morning. I'm Katie Wolf with the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council as the Executive Director, and I'm excited to be here today to introduce David Bucaro, our guest speaker. First, I want to cover a few things about the webinar. Thank you for joining us, and we will give, I'm just going to wait a second to see if we've got everybody. Yep, we're doing well with people getting on board. So just to start out, I'll give you a brief introduction on the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. Our mission is, as you can see there, is completely focused on water quality in our fresh waters. So that's inland lakes, the Great Lakes shoreline, streams, wetlands, and groundwater. We make sure that all that we do is based on solid science, and then we also do participate in advocacy to make sure that regulations both at the local, state, and federal level are in the best interest of water quality for Northern Michigan's fresh waters. We're very active in our educational outreach as well as restoration efforts. So we work throughout the Great Lakes Basin, and we really try to, we're a membership-based organization. We work with the lake associations and quite a few other partner environmental organizations and different levels of government. If you're not familiar with our service area, we primarily focus on Antrim, Charlevoix, Sheboygan, and Emmett counties, and covering over 2,500 miles of rivers and streams and over 1,000, I think over 2,000 lakes altogether, or close to that. And then we also focus on our wetlands, which are, as you may know, are critical to our water quality. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please use the Q&A session. Everyone except the speaker will be muted during the presentation. We will use the chat box only to send messages to you. So if the speaker mentions a certain link or website or reference, we will post that under the chat box. But otherwise, please use the Q&A if you have a question. And so we will save the questions till the end of the presentation, right around 12:45. If we cannot get through all the questions, then we will follow up with you individually. And at this, I think you probably saw the message that this webinar is being recorded, and we will then post it on our Facebook page. We'll have a link, we'll post it on our website, and it will also be posted on YouTube. So if you would like to view it again or share it with friends, it will be there for your viewing. So at this time, I'd like to introduce David Bucaro, and he's got a really cool project title, a mega study project. And when he talks about it in a little more detail, you understand why it's called mega study. I had a chance to meet him in Chicago. I guess it's been about a year ago or so, to talk about shoreline restoration type efforts and what in studies and what we can anticipate in the future with needing to create resilient communities based on changing water levels and climate, or I guess extreme weather events. So he is based out of Chicago. I'll give you a little bit of background information on him, but his credentials are so impressive that some of them he will have to add to it. But so right now he serves as with the Chicago district, and he's responsible for coordinating and executing implementation of the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study. It's the framework for resilient Great Lakes Restoration Initiative investments and other efforts aimed at improving the resilience of the Great Lakes coast to future climate change. He develops and monitors project schedules, budgets, and milestones throughout their life cycle in coordination with functional elements of the district, stakeholders, and partners. He also coordinates project activities with customers and outside interests, including project sponsors. And he works with the community, elected officials, news media, and pretty much the whole gambit. So David, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about coastal resiliency.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate the opportunity here. And thank you for the kind introduction as well. the title that you had on there. My title has changed as of January 1st. I'm now the Chief of Planning in the Chicago District, which is not a big change in relation to this particular study. Instead of being the project manager for it, I'm now leading the technical team of planners that will be executing this study. So really thank you for the opportunity. As I just said a little bit ago before we got started, I'm not that familiar with the tip of the Mitt Watershed Council and the areas, but I will tell you that I have been to the Straits of Mackinac, and I did come down to your watershed, and I remember having a pasty about 15 years ago, and it was delicious. So that's my understanding of this area. But all kidding aside, I am the Chief of Planning. I've been with the Chicago District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for 22 years. I am a hydraulic engineer, and I've been in planning out of those 22 years about 13 years. So this topic, the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study, is near and dear to my heart. I've been working to really get to the starting line on this over 6 years now, and we're really excited to be able to, start to deliver this really large initiative. I'm going to go through. I got 15 slides, and I look forward to comments and questions. I'll leave plenty of time at the end for a dialogue. I'm going to start with our here we go. Let's see. Okay, so I wanted to kind of set the stage for how the Corps of Engineers operates along the Great Lakes and how that really plays into the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study. So there's 3 districts that have areas of responsibility within the Great Lakes watershed. The Corps of Engineers is primarily broken up by watersheds. And so the Chicago district, where I'm located in downtown Chicago, is responsible for Lake Michigan watershed within Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. We also have some areas in the upper Illinois and the upper Wabash River. We went through a realignment back in 2020. Really the start of the pandemic, we assumed responsibility in Wisconsin and more in Illinois and Indiana from Detroit, Buffalo, and Rock Island districts. The area that you're at, the tip of the Mitt area, is within the Detroit district boundaries, as shown in this purple. And then our Buffalo district has the watershed that drains the Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. The Corps' mission, key missions, are navigation, flood risk management, both in terms of riverine and coastal, aquatic ecosystem restoration, and emergency management. And the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study really touches all 3 of those missions. We have a workforce of about 1,500 employees across the 3 districts. Just some real high-level Great Lakes facts and figures. Every time I talk about these types of facts and figures, people are always kind of shocked at how unique and really significant the Great Lakes are. And just a couple things. So 95% of the U.S.'s freshwater supply is within the Great Lakes, an area of 94,000 square miles of drainage. That includes about half in the U.S. and half in Canada. And that drainage area, the water surface is 94,000. The drainage area is 201,000 square miles. So a huge drainage basin, roughly the size of California and Ohio combined. The coastline, we're talking about 50-50 in terms of the U.S. and the Canadian side. The Canadian is combined it's 10,000. The U.S. side is 4,500 miles. But when you add the connecting channels between the lakes, we're about 5,200 miles, which is significant because if you took the coast of the Atlantic, the Gulf Coast, and the Pacific Coast combined, the length of shoreline on the Great Lakes coast within the United States. If you pulled that blue string out, it would actually be longer than all three of them combined with the connecting channels. So that's a substantial length of shoreline that has a tremendous amount of resources. There's 37 million people in U.S. and Canada across 8 states, 2 provinces, 35 federally recognized tribes, 75 congressional districts, 16 Senate offices, just a tremendous amount of people and political power within the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes Caucus on the federal side, both the House and Senate side, are very powerful, and they work really great together. In terms of the Corps' mission and our navigation structures, we have 140 harbors. 60 of those are commercial, 80 of them are recreational. Within the U.S., we own and maintain 104 miles of breakwaters and jetties and over 600 miles of navigation channels. So a substantial mission that the Corps has to maintain safe navigation throughout the Great Lakes. So before I get into the coastal resiliency study itself, I wanted to take a step back and show the overall strategy as depicted on this slide and the figures here. And what you see on the left are really inputs to a watershed study on the right. And then what comes from the watershed study are the potential for spin-off feasibility studies and then actions by others. So starting on the left-hand side and the red kind of bubbles that I've highlighted, I'm going to get into more detail on those 4 things in the following slides. But really from a high level, we're trying to leverage regional efforts and partnerships that have been funded through various federal and state programs, really in the pursuit of long-term solutions to reduce coastal risks from future climate change. We're trying to proactively plan to identify the vulnerabilities across the coast, to identify strategic actions to improve the resiliency and minimize the amount of threat and risk to those vulnerabilities, and then develop a collaborated plan with strategic actions that can be done at the federal, the state, and the local level to really implement those actions to improve resiliency. And so we're building upon efforts that have been done by the Corps, by other federal agencies, our state coastal programs, and NOAA, USGS, and a lot of this has been funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is a federal program that's administered by US EPA. There's 16 federal agencies that implement the GLRI and get funded through that since 2010. So I will tell you that we've been working 6 years to get the federal funding, the state funding, the partnerships and advocacy set up to be able to conduct this watershed study. We wouldn't be able to do even start to really look across the entire watershed and identify vulnerabilities without all the foundational work that has been done through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and other programs. So those things on the left are feeding into a watershed assessment study, which is really the proactive planning effort. Congress in 2020 gave the Corps of Engineers additional flexibility that where we identify high-risk areas and we have a non-federal sponsor willing to conduct a further evaluation, we can spin off traditional feasibility studies that could lead to a authorization and implementation of a project by the Corps of Engineers. That's only one piece of it. That watershed study that we're about to embark on is not only identifying action for the Corps of Engineers, but our federal partners, our state partners, and local communities.
David,
So,
David, could I, just for a second, would you mind setting your screen to full, so your slides are full screen?
Yeah, I will try. We just tried this earlier and it gave me a kind of a weird thing. So let me try again. Yeah,
Okay,
no, that's fine. We'll try. How about now?
better, thank you.
Does that work?
Yes, that's good, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Okay, so I'm going to go through those four kind of red bubbled areas individually, starting at the top with the National Shoreline Management Study. This is a study that was just completed last year. It's a national study, but the Great Lakes portion of that study was completed last year, and it's available on our website. It took about 10 years to complete this effort, and really what it was to identify and assess erosion and accretion across all of the Great Lakes. And there's 5 different reports, 1 per lake, and then there's an overall regional assessment overview that was completed in May of last year. The summary of those key findings and management actions will be built upon through the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study. There was a significant amount of work that was done in gathering existing available data and information from stakeholders across the Great Lakes coast in the development of this. The next thing is the framework for resilient GLRI investments. This is really exciting because we recognize that the past is really not a predictor of the future when it comes to the Great Lakes, that there is climate change effects that are happening. And for us to continue to rely upon what has happened in the past to design infrastructure and to make management decisions in the future is really missing the mark. And so we actually peeled this off from the original Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study concept and was able to get funding through Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to really conduct this effort to identify the expected range of future water levels, wave heights, and ice conditions over the next century, looking at a variation of warming scenarios, 2 degrees Celsius to 6 degrees Celsius, and how that will translate to high and low lake levels, wave conditions, and ice conditions. That's really the basis by which we're going to evaluate vulnerabilities across the watershed and make recommendations for sustainable management and investment decisions. This is a really exciting kind of what we like to call, tip of the spear type of really researchy type of work, where the Chicago district is leading this. We're managing it, but we have a study team of experts internal to the Corps at our Engineering Research and Development Center. We're teaming up with NOAA and their Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory that's in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and USGS Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Science Center, which is out in Massachusetts. We started this, it's been, let's see, what's it been, about 2.5 years now. We're over halfway complete in the effort to really stitch together and do some cutting edge modeling efforts. Throughout the process, we've had quarterly meetings with the state coastal programs and other designated GLRI representatives to ensure that what we're developing is going to be useful in the end, not only for the coastal resiliency study, but for the states, the communities, to really have this information across the entirety of the watershed, so that any investments and plans and designs for coastal infrastructure and management decisions are based upon, and there's a recognition of what the future could be. Now, we're not going to be able to identify exactly what the future is because we don't know where climate change is headed, but we're going to be able to provide that full range of conditions and how that translates on the Great Lakes. So the deliverables, what are we doing here? We're going to provide really water levels in terms of static and surge and wave setup across all of the the nearshore areas in the deep water area and host that on a publicly accessible database for the full range of climate conditions. So pretty substantial amount of data that we're going to be offering up here in about a year. That is really setting what we think a new trajectory for the future conditions and understanding of what is possible on the Great Lakes. Similar type of work, has started on the ocean coast. I will tell you that from an engineering perspective, the future conditions on the Great Lakes is even more complicated than on the ocean coast. We don't have sea level rise here on the Great Lakes. Our systems are extratropical versus tropical systems. We have ice to deal with. We have low lake levels, high lake levels, and to be completely honest, the state of science on the Great Lakes is a little bit further behind the ocean coast. So we're through this effort and other efforts. I will tell you that the federal agencies are working really hard to play catch up on the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and similar programs are really what we're utilizing to bring the best data science to the Great Lakes here. Okay, the third thing that I wanted to mention is the Engineering with Nature Natural and Nature-Based Features Playbook. This is a recognition that if we identify vulnerabilities and strategic actions to address those vulnerabilities, we got to do it in an innovative way. So we need the tools in the toolbox as planners in order to look at natural-based solutions and evaluate those solutions going forward. And the body of work that has been on, from the Corps' perspective, on natural-based solutions has really been focused on the ocean coast. And so we were able to convince our Corps leadership and Lieutenant General Spellman to really prioritize this effort within the Great Lakes. And happy to report that we kicked off this effort in January here in Chicago. We had about 70 people attend. There's a picture of the in-person folks. We had folks from all over the basin, including representatives in Canada. We're wanting to learn from what has been done to date. We know we're not starting from scratch. We want to build upon efforts that have been done in the Great Lakes, in addition to taking efforts that have been done on the ocean coast and bringing those to the Great Lakes, altering those so that they work on the Great Lakes. This is pretty exciting as well. This is something that I think is really important going forward, so that we have confidence in these types of measures to be implemented here in the Great Lakes. There's a website, Engineering with Nature program. The Corps of Engineers is the lead for that. It's about a 10-year-old program. If those of you that are interested in natural-based solutions, please Google the Engineering with Nature program. We got a lot of stuff going on enterprise-wide. There's also a monthly podcast that is actually really interesting. They've had it going for about 6 years now. So if you're not familiar with the Engineering with Nature program, hopefully you'll take the time to look at it and see some of the great stuff that we're trying to lead here in the Corps of Engineers. Okay, so let's get to the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study. So those are all the things that are going to lead into the resiliency study. What exactly is the resiliency study? Well, this is a watershed study, and it's really a collaborative approach. The Chicago, Buffalo, and Detroit districts, along with our research labs down in Vicksburg, both the Coastal and Hydraulics Lab and the Environmental Lab, and our Planning Center of Expertise in the North Atlantic Division, we're collaborating to deliver this. But we're not delivering it in a vacuum here. We're delivering it with all 8 Great Lakes states as non-federal sponsors. These are cost-sharing partners that are contributing 25% to the total cost of this. And I'll tell you, that's different than similar efforts that have happened on the ocean coast, where Congress has provided a supplemental appropriations to the Corps of Engineers after hurricanes, which resulted in 100% federal delivery. And the end result that you get from a coastal resiliency study that is 100% federal versus cost shared like this one, you get a different result. You get buy-in and input and collaboration that you don't necessarily see if it's a 100% federal cost. We're also working with other federal partners, including NOAA, USGS, EPA, and FEMA, and others in the development of this. We estimate the study cost to be about $14.4 million, cost shared 75-25. Happy to report that we're nearly complete with our project management plan that outlines the detailed scope, schedule, and budget and specific activities. We are gearing up to execute that and sign off on it by the states and our Brigadier General, our Commanding General for Great Lakes and Ohio River Division by the end of the month. So we're in crunch time right now. We're nearly complete. This is, as I mentioned, it's been 6 years in the making. We started this effort really of the concept of the coastal resiliency study and the advocacy around getting our federal appropriators, our state partners, and really stakeholders energized and understanding where we're going 6 years ago. The summer of 2016 is really when we kind of had this idea where we're thinking big picture, what's the next big issue that's from a regional perspective that's facing the Great Lakes. And at that time, we saw historic low lake levels that were going up at a very high rate. We were near high record levels on Lake Ontario, and we just recognized that things are changing, and we need to get ahead of it. It took 4 budget cycles from the federal side to get the new start appropriations needed. We were able to secure that last fiscal year, and this fiscal year we got capability funding. So we have all the funds that we need in order to execute this going forward. FY24 President's budget was released on March 9th. That also included $3 million federal funds. So, all the pieces are in place in order to execute this collaborative study. Exciting from my standpoint, being the first project manager of this study and working on it for so long, is that we were successful in executing a 9-party cost-sharing agreement at the end of September. And that picture that's in the upper right is from the signing ceremony that we had in Erie, Pennsylvania in late September. And all those folks there represent the states, the Corps of Engineers, NOAA, and our Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. So it was a really big deal, and there's never been a 9-party cost-sharing agreement with 8 states ever executed in the history of the Corps of Engineers. So it's pretty impressive. There's some things in that agreement that really give the states a lot of power in dictating where the scope and schedule and budget are. And so we're working through those things. We're really on a really great path right now to really get to the starting line and start executing this. So real quick, I added this in here in case these slides would be shared and there was anyone that wanted to know exactly what our guidance is for conducting a watershed study. But really, at top line, it's developing a shared watershed vision, recommendations for action that can be taken to address identified problems, and a strategic roadmap to implement those recommendations. And we are required by law to coordinate with other federal agencies, including the Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, and the EPA and other heads of appropriate agencies, so that this watershed plan is not a core plan. It's a federal plan. It also consults with states, tribes, interstate and local government entities. So at the end of the day, this watershed plan that we're embarking on will be really the plan for the future of the Great Lakes coastal areas in terms of resiliency going forward. And we're pretty excited. Some of the leaders within the Corps have described this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really set the trajectory for the Great Lakes in a really great area. Okay, so general scope, what are we trying to do here? We're really trying to protect the long-term economic, environmental, and social value of the Great Lakes coast through proactive planning. We're going to conduct a vulnerability assessment to identify those areas that are already or likely to become vulnerable to future flooding, erosion, and accretion. We're going to identify measures to address vulnerabilities and improve resilience and adaptability of coastal resources, and then develop that coastal resiliency plan. Excuse me. We've broken down those three key objectives into 5 major tasks. You know, this watershed study can't be done in a vacuum. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of stakeholder and tribal engagement across the basin to identify those problems, really define the overall shared vision for the coast, and solicit feedback and input on the assessment results and recommended actions. So you'll see over the next 4 years how much engagement that this study is going to have with groups such as the tip of the Mitt and other stakeholders. There'll be plenty of opportunities for public input to this study. The first thing we're going to do, along with the shared visioning, is conduct a basin-wide analysis. We'll be developing a publicly accessible geoportal, which would be utilizing existing data sets to really identify the risk of coastal resources in terms of infrastructure, habitat, communities, which are vulnerable to the range of future conditions, those storms, flooding, low water, erosion, and accretion. Based upon the results of that basin-wide analysis, we'll conduct area-specific risk and vulnerability assessments on a subset of high-risk areas. We've identified where we scoped 14 different focused area evaluations spread across the 8 Great Lakes states. And really that focused evaluation will result in really the identification of ongoing plan, near-term and long-term actions to address the vulnerabilities that are identified and improve resilience. In addition to those focused area evaluations, we recognize that we're not going to be able to look at every high-risk area across 5,200 miles. And so we're developing guidance for stakeholders to use the tools that we're developing to conduct their own additional area-specific vulnerability assessments and identification of actions to improve resilience. So we're going to give provide the tools and the processes to conduct focused evaluations outside of those areas that are included in this study. And then the last part is really the watershed assessment, that coastal resiliency plan that really takes all the results and outlines strategic recommendations for action by the Corps, other federal agencies, non-federal interests to inform future investment decisions. The sequencing is those priorities and where federal authorities and appropriations are available, and really the where new ones are needed. So this really strategic plan could be utilized by Congress to develop and fund additional programs going forward in order to address vulnerabilities across the coast. This is an illustration of those major tasks that I just laid out. The South Atlantic Coastal Study was completed last year. That included the areas of let's see, what was included in there. South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama was included. And that similar effort, we're utilizing and really we're utilizing some of the types of work that they had done, including the basin-wide analysis, as part of this study. And so that illustration there is really what they had produced. Something similar would be produced for the Great Lakes that you can, drill down and identify where those vulnerabilities are to the different resource categories that I had explained for different climate change scenarios. Based upon the results of that, then the states, along with the Corps of Engineers, will select 14 different areas to then do further evaluation. That's what's in that map is simply just a illustration. These sites have not been identified. We've just identified and scoped, the number of sites that we've included. We've also scoped 10 coastal resources per focus area. We'll be conducting in-person workshops with resource experts to identify the strategic actions that would be recommended for those focus areas. And then that gets rolled up into this strategic plan, watershed plan. The other task that I had mentioned, the risk-informed decision framework document. This is the guidance that those areas that were not included, the 14 areas, if there's a desire to do a focused area evaluation, this type of work would, or this guidance would be offered up for folks to use. All right, that's kind of the long and short of it. I hope it looks like I'm right on time here. My contact information is on the left. Mike Padilla he's the new mega study project manager. He's been with the Corps even longer than I have, 22 years for me. I think he's around 27 years. He's been a project manager most of his career. And so between the two of us, we're gonna work really hard to deliver this pretty exciting study over the next 4 years. So with that, I would like to open it up for any questions, comments. Katie, I'm not sure how you want to do this, but.
Well, I'll start the questions here. I was wondering if you could update us right now on some of the Corps' predictions for how lake levels are projected to change.
Yeah, I don't have an update at this point. Our hypothesis is that with climate change, that we're going to see higher highs, lower lows, and much more dynamic, quicker changes. What we've seen over the past, decade is really much more intense storms, bigger swings in terms of annual precipitation versus drought conditions, and really the lake levels are driven by climatic conditions. So long-term precipitation and evaporation, that's what dictates the lake levels. In addition to that, we're seeing changes in weather patterns that drive wave conditions during storms. So I can't report on what the results of the GLRI framework modeling results are at this point, because we don't have those results. But our hypothesis is we think we're going to see what some have classified as weather whiplash. The director of the Coastal Hydraulics Lab had used that term in the past month to describe climate change effects in other parts of the country, and we think we're going to see the same sort of thing. But I can't definitively state what the modeling results will be.
So this is a quick question. This came up at the very beginning, and they asked what DDD stands for.
Sorry, yeah, the Corps loves our acronyms. DDE is the Deputy District Engineer, and that's the senior civilian within each district. And then our district engineer, which is also the commander of the district, is the senior officer, Army officer that's in charge of the district.
Okay. So next question, as water scarcity, particularly out west, continues with climate change, how will the Great Lakes be protected from being used as a giant reservoir for the US?
Yeah, happy to note that the Great Lakes has a compact, which all 8 Great Lakes states and Canada originally created. I think it was in the early 80s, and it was updated in the early 2000s. That really restricts any outflows and the scenario that is described there. So there was a recognition, years before climate change was even thought about, that we have a unique resource here in the Great Lakes and that it needs to be protected. And others outside of the Great Lakes region may be looking to that, freshwater source for their requirements. And so, the states and the federal government and the 2 countries got together to protect that.
So next question, can you discuss the types of vulnerabilities that are possible in the area of Little Traverse Bay? And I know you said you weren't at the beginning as familiar with this area, so that may be something that we'd have to follow up on.
Yeah, unfortunately I'm not that familiar with Little Traverse Bay, and so I can't really comment on it, other than the Bay areas within the Great Lakes all can be impacted, as the orientation of the bay to the landscape, and how storm, not only intensity in terms of winds, but the direction at which it happens can be impacted. So I can only speak in generalities there. I apologize.
Okay, so the next question, hardening of shorelines limits adaptability and resiliency in face of uncertain changes in water levels. Are soft engineering approaches being considered?
Absolutely, and that is our intention, is to really look at the full range of measures that can be employed, including structural, non-structural, natural-based features, and really what we call institutional controls. And so, structural is kind of what some folks would say, gray infrastructure. That's what most of the armoring would be classified as. Non-structural is typically how the Corps defines non-structural, is where you're removing a resource from the risk area. So you could flood-proof, you could buy out, you could elevate, those type of things. Natural-based features, or NNBF, is what we like to, I think the term of art for the Corps is natural and nature-based features. This is really looking at green type of measures, restoring the natural system, the Great Lakes, the littoral system, and the way that sands move has been interrupted a lot and altered, not only by structures that are in the lake, but also when you armor the shoreline, you reduce sands that are feeding that conveyor belt of littoral sands. And so restoring the natural system and how that functions, along with wetlands within barrier islands, those type of things, are traditional natural and nature-based features. The other concept that we'll be looking at is really teaming up gray and green, and that is kind of an emerging term of calling it multiple lines of defense. And that's where your recognition that natural-based features only have so much protection levels typically, and in areas where you have maybe a critical infrastructure or a resource that that would be, there'd be a high risk in terms of consequences if it fails. Then you can team up, a different layers where maybe the first line of defense is the natural nature-based feature, and then you have a more structural solution as the last line of defense. These types of concepts are being evaluated on the Gulf Coast primarily. The Corps recently completed a major study on the Texas coast, and there was that concept of natural nature-based features combined with more traditional hardened.
Do risks to coastal resources associated with man-made hazards, such as the Line 5 oil pipeline, feature in this coastal resiliency study?
Ooh, that's a good question. The Enbridge Line 5 is not included in the scope of the study. That is not. It just isn't included. So I really can't comment on that. Other than we did not include pipelines and the risks associated with pipelines to the coastal resiliency study. We're focused on really the climatic hazards associated with resilience, but we do recognize that there are other risks to coastal areas that are outside of climatic drivers.
So would you expect when you do the more regional, meetings and things, that those types of concerns would come out as being additional parts of the planning process?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be asking for any and all, feedback, and we want to hear people's concerns. There's only, we've scoped it to a certain, level, and like I said, we're focusing on, climate effects. But if we receive a lot of comments and concerns of other things, like pipelines or train derailments, or there's all sorts of things that can be a risk, that could spur other studies by the federal government. I don't know, but we recognize that we're not looking at everything. We're not looking at invasive species. We're not looking at pipeline bursts. We're not looking at things like that. We had to scope it somewhere, and this is.
Okay, so we have another question. We have heard about Asian carp risk. What sorts of actions are being taken to or contemplated to keep these creatures out of the Great Lakes? So it kind of goes to your last answer.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I always get a Asian carp, invasive carp question. So the Corps has done a lot of work in this arena, really starting with the electrical barriers that the Chicago District constructed, operates, and maintains on the Sanitary and Ship Canal in Romeoville, Illinois. We then conducted a Great Lakes Mississippi River interbasin study. I think that was completed in 2014. That outlined a range of options and technologies to address all invasive species transferring in both directions, with the invasive carp coming upstream through the Illinois River into Lake Michigan being a critical component. We then spun off a feasibility study at Brannan Road Lock and Dam, which was identified as a choke point on the Illinois River. That study then led to the authorization of a project to reduce the risk. That then was designed, and they've completed design, and now the Corps and the state of Illinois are in negotiations for the project partnership agreement, which would then lead to the implementation of that project. I know the state of Michigan is working with the state of Illinois to provide some funds to the non-federal share, which the current, I think it's at 90% federal, 10% non-federal match on that. So yes, in short, there's a lot of work being done to ensure that the invasive carp do not make it into the Great Lakes, and there's multiple lines of defense that are being employed here.
If you're really interested in that topic, our next Icebreaker series is with Dr. Dan Zielinski from the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and he's going to talk about the Fish Pass project along the Boardman River in Traverse City, so it's a little closer to home there. Okay, we've got another question here. This one is relative to line 5, but it asks the component about, are you considering emergency response preparation? Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, so I did mention the structural, non-structural, nature-based features. What I didn't include was institutional controls. And what we would classify as institutional controls would be kind of that catch-all of not only preparing for a disaster, preparing for high lake levels, low lake levels, that full range of stressors, but also how do you respond, during an event, and then what types of ordinances or regulatory requirements should be put in place in order to not create additional risks going forward. Because we recognize that the federal government does not have a land use planning authority that's delegated to the locals. That was the founding fathers ensured that the federal government doesn't have that level of oversight. But we recognize that there needs to be some recommendations or at least a identification that what is done on the land and the measures that are put in place have impacts and effects outside of that particular location. A perfect example is what I just mentioned on littoral transport and armoring certain shorelines then impacts other areas within the along the shoreline. And so this institutional controls will the measures will look at not only preparation, emergency management, but also long-term effects on changing some sort of regulations if need be at the local level.
So thank you. With the will the study include connecting rivers such as the Detroit River and St. Clair River? Yeah,
the connecting channels are included in this study. The St. Clair, Detroit River, St. Mary's River that connects the lakes, including Lake St. Clair itself is also part of the study. The study goes all the way to the St. Lawrence River, and that's where we kind of cut it off.
Lots of questions, but I think we're going to get done in time. Is there any concern that funding will not be available for all 4 years of the study?
I don't think there is concern on that. There's already we've once we got over the hurdle of getting a new start study in FY22, and like I said, that took 4 budget cycles, 6 years and 4 budget cycles to really get to. We've had capability funding appropriated in 2022 and 23, and we're in the president's budget for 24. There's a lot of interest and frankly expectations by our elected officials at the federal level that are very supportive of this. Everyone recognizes this is really the first step to comprehensive resiliency across the Great Lakes. And before, how do I put this? So a lot of times, the federal government tends to, open the pocketbook after disaster, and we're trying to get in front of it. And it's always less expensive and less damaging to do proactive planning than there is after something happens. And so, we've articulated that, I think, effectively within the Great Lakes. And, it is a testament to stakeholder groups such as the Tip of the Mitt and others that recognize that the right thing to do is to do proactive planning and are championing that in the right places. So I'm not concerned, but I will tell you that we have to deliver in order to continue to get that support. And I understand that pressure, and my team is here and excited to do this. Like I said, it's once in a generation opportunity. So
thank you for that. Another question, shouldn't climate risk to infrastructure, such as, we're getting back to the pipelines again, such as pipelines and more that could threaten coastal resiliency, be considered? You probably have already addressed that in some of your earlier statements. And again, that'll be something that'll be able to come out when you hold the community-based meetings as well.
Yeah.
Since the upper Great Lakes flows through St. Clair River, has there been studies, plans to regulate flow at here or to modulate lake levels?
Yeah, we have. I know there's been a lot of regulation studies. The International Joint Commission, is in charge of the regulation of the Great Lakes. We're not anticipating doing any, flow regulation evaluations as part of the coastal resiliency study. Depending on what we find with the GLRI framework, there may be recommendations that are made to IJC, which our commanding general of Great Lakes and Ohio River Division sits on the IJC board. So depending on what we find, there could be offshoot, studies looking at things such as that, but it's not part of the coastal resiliency study to relook at regulation plans.
And that's the International Joint Commission. So that's Canada and US working together there. Okay, your last question. Are drowned river mouth lakes with connecting channels included in the study?
Yeah, so we are looking at the areas at which the lakes themselves and the lake levels and wave setup affects the tributaries. So at that point where they're like in estuary areas where the lake actually impacts the tributaries, that's the limit of our study. So on the upper end, we're looking at any effects on the river mouths that are impacted by future lake levels. We're not going up into the watershed, which would be a huge increase in scope to look at all of the areas upstream of the river mouth, but they are included.
Well, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. I know that's you had quite a few questions, and to stay focused that length of time, I really appreciate it. Obviously, there's interest in what you're doing, and so we will stay posted and continue to provide updates to our listeners here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
So there's just a few things that I'd like to share real quickly. We do have another session coming up April 5th with Dan Zielinski. He is with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. He's both an engineer and a doctorate, has his doctorate. So a really smart guy and fascinating project with the Boardman River Fish Pass. So we hope that you'll come back and join us on April 5th. And next, I just want to encourage you, if you are appreciating learning about your watershed, we have a new program that's a podcast that We started 2 weeks ago, and every other Thursday, we'll be posting it. It'll be an opportunity if you're in the car and you want to listen to information about your watershed, you can tune in. And our staff will cover many different topics on the watershed, and they're fairly in depth. We're setting them up to be about 15 minutes each. And then there'll be, part 1 and part 2 and what have you, so you can come back. So I encourage you to check that out. And then lastly, I think you probably saw that there were a couple little surveys. We also have an evaluation, which is really helpful to us in being able to plan our programs for the future. And again, I just really want to thank you, David, for joining us. We have a little gift we'll send you in the mail. It's part funny, but we hope you enjoy it. But it's also a sincere appreciation for you giving your time today with us in the tip of the Mitt area.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you all, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future, and be on the lookout for our stakeholder engagements coming up this summer.
So Tip of the Mitt has been collecting data, in this area since 1979. So if we can be a resource, but also when you come around to planning your meetings, we'd love to be helpful to you.
Sounds good.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We really appreciate you being with us today.